Mary I of England, known in the annals of history as Mary Tudor or, with a nickname that resonates like a sinister echo, Bloody Mary, is a figure who seems plucked from a Gothic novel but who walked, breathed, and ruled in 16th century England. Her life, a tapestry woven with threads of religious fervor, personal tragedies, and political decisions that swung between the courageous and the disastrous, is a tale that not only informs but also chills. To say that Mary rotted in life might sound like the headline of a sensationalist tabloid, but if we scratch the surface, the metaphor isn't entirely off the mark. Between her frail health, her obsession with restoring Catholicism in a country already leaning toward Protestantism, and a series of personal misfortunes that would make any tragedy screenwriter pale, Mary I is a case study in how the weight of a crown can crush even the most tenacious spirits. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more fascinating stories like this. Born on February 18, 1516, at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, Mary was the only surviving child of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Imagine being the cherished daughter of a king as volatile as Henry, whose idea of solving marital problems included divorces, annulments, and, in extreme cases, sharp axes. Mary grew up in an environment of opulence, surrounded by Flemish tapestries, banquets that could feed an entire village, and an education that rivaled that of any European prince. She learned Latin, French, Spanish, and music, playing the lute with a skill that, according to chroniclers, could bring tears to the eyes of the most hardened courtiers. But this life of privilege was tinged with instability. Her mother, Catherine, was a woman of unyielding faith and a respected queen, daughter of Spain's Catholic monarchs, Isabella and Ferdinand. However, her failure to provide Henry with a male heir turned their marriage into a diplomatic and religious battleground. By the time Mary was 9, the cracks in her parents' marriage had become a chasm, and by the time she was 17, her world had collapsed. Her mother was banished, her title of princess was stripped away, and she was declared illegitimate after the annulment of Henry and Catherine's marriage. Being a teenager in the Tudor court was like playing Russian roulette, but with even slimmer chances of emerging unscathed. The drama began in earnest when Henry, obsessed with securing a male succession, fell in love with Anne Boleyn, a court lady whose ambition was matched only by her charisma. And wasn't just a fleeting affair, she was a force of nature who altered the course of English history. Determined to marry her, Henry defied the Pope and broke with Rome, establishing the Church of England with himself as its supreme head. This schism wasn't just a religious matter, it was a political earthquake that shook Europe. For Mary, it meant her mother's banishment to damp, remote castles, where Catherine lived out her final years in near-inhuman conditions. Mary herself was sidelined from court and sent to secondary residences, like Hatfield Castle, where she was ordered to serve her half-sister, Elizabeth, and Boleyn's daughter. Picture the scene. Mary, at 17, a princess raised to be a queen, forced to bow to a diaper-clad infant who represented her family's ruin. The humiliation must have been unbearable, but Mary maintained a dignity bordering on heroic, though she likely ground her teeth in private. Mary inherited her mother's stubbornness and a devotion to Catholicism that wasn't just a belief but a form of resistance. While Henry VIII dismantled monasteries, confiscated church treasures, and executed those who opposed his new church, Mary clung to her faith as if it were a lifeline in a sea of heresies. She refused to renounce the Catholic Mass, even when it put her in danger. On one occasion, it said that Henry threatened to arrest her if she continued defying his religious edicts, but Mary, with that mix of courage and obstinacy that defined her, held her ground. This wasn't just a matter of principle, it was a declaration of war against a world trying to erase her. However, the pressure was immense. 4 years, Mary lived in a kind of internal exile, watched by court spies and isolated from her allies. Her health, never robust, began to suffer. She endured debilitating headaches, insomnia, and digestive issues that the doctors of the time, with their limited knowledge, couldn't explain. Some modern historians suggest Mary suffered from chronic anxiety or even a psychosomatic disorder, exacerbated by the stress of her situation. In any case, her body seemed to mirror the torment of her soul. Henry VIII's death in 1547 marked a turning point, though not necessarily for the better. The throne passed to Edward VI, Henry's son with Jane Seymour, a 9-year-old boy whose health was as fragile as a house of cards. Edward, raised as a Protestant, was surrounded by advisors who saw Catholicism as an existential threat. During his reign, Mary became a kind of living martyr for English Catholics. She refused to attend Protestant services, held secret masses in her residences, and on more than one occasion, openly defied Edward's advisors. This was, to put it mildly, like stepping into a lion's cage with a stick and starting to poke it. Edward's advisors, led by figures like John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, tried to pressure her into submission, but Mary was unyielding. When ordered to stop her private masses, she responded with a letter that was a masterpiece of diplomacy and defiance, arguing that her conscience wouldn't allow her to betray her faith. Edward, despite his youth, was a committed Protestant and was furious, but he didn't dare arrest his older sister, perhaps fearing it would spark a rebellion. Edward's reign, however, was short-lived. In 1553, at just 15, the young king fell gravely ill, likely from tuberculosis. His death was imminent, and with it came a thorny question. Who would inherit the throne? According to Henry VIII's will, Mary was next in line, followed by her half-sister Elizabeth. But Edward's advisors, led by Northumberland, had other plans. They didn't want Mary, an avowed Catholic, on the throne, nor did they fully trust Elizabeth, whose religious loyalty was ambiguous. So, they devised a plan that, in retrospect, was as bold as it was foolish, to name Lady Jane Grey, a distant cousin of Mary and a devout Protestant, as the successor. Jane, about 16, was a learned young woman but politically insignificant, more interested in her books than in court intrigues. She was thrust onto the throne as a puppet, crowned queen in a rushed ceremony that lasted less than a breath. 9 days, to be exact. Mary, not one to sit idly by while her throne rosary was stolen, reacted with a speed and determination that surprised everyone. From her residence in Norfolk, she rallied an army of supporters, many of them Catholics but also nobles loyal to the legitimate line of succession. She rode toward London, gaining support in every town she passed. Her charisma, often underestimated, shone in those moments. Mary wasn't a warrior queen like Isabella of Castile, but she had a presence that inspired loyalty. Within days, Jane's regime crumbled. Northumberland was arrested, Jane was imprisoned in the Tower of London, and Mary entered the capital as the undisputed queen. It was a masterstroke, executed with barely any bloodshed, and a reminder that Mary, despite her frailties, had the mettle of a Tudor. Being queen, however, was a challenge of epic proportions. England in 1553 was a fractured country, divided by religion, impoverished by years of economic mismanagement, and surrounded by foreign powers sniffing out any sign of weakness. Mary, who was 37 when she took the throne, was determined to return England to the Catholic fold. This wasn't just a personal preference, it was a mission she saw as a divine mandate. Restoring Catholicism meant undoing her father's and brother's reforms, a process that required tact, resources, and, above all, time. 3 things Mary lacked. She appointed Catholic bishops, restored the Latin Mass, and reopened monasteries that had been plundered during the Reformation. But every step she took met resistance. Protestants, who had thrived under Edward, weren't willing to yield without a fight, and many Catholics, weary of decades of instability, were lukewarm in their support. Mary, however, wasn't one for half measures. Her faith was absolute, and she expected her subjects to share her fervor. One of Mary's most controversial moves was her marriage to Philip II of Spain, son of Emperor Charles V and future king of an empire spanning half the world. The decision made strategic sense. A marriage with Spain would strengthen England against France, secure the support of a Catholic power, and, with luck, produce an heir to solidify the Catholic Restoration. But in practice, it was a disaster. Mary, at 38, was deeply in love with Philip, or so her letters suggest, filled with an almost adolescent affection. Philip, at 27, was a pragmatic man who saw the marriage as a political alliance, not a love story. The age difference wasn't the biggest issue. The problem was that Philip had no intention of staying in England longer than necessary. The English, meanwhile, were horrified at the idea of a foreign king consort. Spain was seen as an oppressive power, and rumors that Philip planned to turn England into a Spanish colony spread like wildfire. Caricatures of the time depicted Philip as a hungry wolf and Mary as a naive sheep, which wasn't exactly a compliment to the Queen. The marriage sparked a rebellion in 1554, led by Thomas Wyatt, a Protestant noble who marched on London with thousands of followers. The revolt was crushed, but not without difficulty, and Mary responded with a severity that marked a turning point in her reign. Wyatt and his leaders were executed, and Lady Jane Grey, still languishing in the Tower, was beheaded along with her husband, Guilford Dudley. Mary didn't take these decisions lightly. According to her advisors, she wept when signing Jane's execution order but felt she had no choice. Wyatt's rebellion had shown that her throne was far from secure, and any sign of weakness could be fatal. However, these executions, especially Jane's, a young woman who had played no active role in the rebellion, damaged Mary's image. For many, it was the beginning of her transformation into Bloody Mary. Mary's health, meanwhile, remained a constant source of trouble. Since her teens, she had suffered from abdominal pains, migraines, and periods of weakness that left her bedridden for days. The court's doctors, with their remedies of bloodletting and herbs, were hardly models of competence. Some suggested her ailments were the result of unbalanced humors, an explanation as useful as an umbrella in a hurricane. Modern historians have speculated that Mary may have suffered from endometriosis, an ovarian cyst, or even uterine cancer, conditions that could explain both her chronic pain and the phantom pregnancies that marked her reign. In 1554, shortly after her marriage to Philip, Mary announced she was pregnant. Her abdomen swelled, her period stopped, and, according to witnesses, she displayed a maternal glow that transformed her usually serious face. The court buzzed with rumors and preparations. Cradles were ordered, garments were sewn for the future prince, and Mary attended daily masses to give thanks for the divine blessing. But months passed, and no baby arrived. The expected delivery date, April 1555, came and went. The doctors, nervous, spoke of a miscalculation, but the truth was crueler. Mary wasn't pregnant. What she had experienced was a phantom pregnancy, a condition where the body mimics pregnancy symptoms due to intense desire or hormonal imbalance. For Mary, who had staked everything on the idea of a Catholic heir, the disappointment was devastating. The court, which had celebrated the pregnancy with feasts and proclamations, fell into an awkward silence. Philip, already looking for excuses to return to Spain, used the situation to distance himself, leaving Mary alone in her grief. The public humiliation was immense. Rumors that the Queen was mad or cursed began to circulate, and her authority suffered. Undeterred, Mary believed she was pregnant again in 1557. The same symptoms reappeared: a swollen abdomen, absent periods, renewed hope. But once again, there was no baby. This second phantom pregnancy was even more devastating, as Mary was weaker, both physically and politically. Her health was deteriorating rapidly, and rumors of serious illness began to spread. Some historians suggest these phantom pregnancies were caused by an ovarian tumor, which could explain the abdominal swelling and hormonal imbalances. Others point to psychological stress so intense that her body literally deceived itself. Whatever the cause, these episodes contributed to the image of a queen rotting in life, a woman whose obsession with motherhood consumed her from within. Meanwhile, the religious persecutions, known as the Marian persecutions, continued to cast a shadow over her reign. Starting in 1555, Mary and her bishops began executing Protestants accused of heresy. Such executions weren't new in Europe. Burning heretics was common in Catholic countries like Spain. But in England, where Protestantism had gained ground, the fires were seen as acts of barbarity. It's estimated that around 280 people were burned during Mary's reign, from prominent theologians like Thomas Cranmer to artisans and peasants whose only crime was refusing to recant their faith. The stories of these executions, recorded in John Foxe's Book of Martyrs, became a powerful tool of Protestant propaganda. Fox portrayed the victims as heroic martyrs and Mary as a bloodthirsty tyrant. Though the number of executions was lower than in other reigns, Henry VIII, for example, executed thousands for religious and political reasons. The intensity and publicity of the Marian persecutions left an indelible mark. Mary wasn't a sadist. She genuinely believed the executions were necessary to save her subjects' souls and protect the true faith. But her inflexibility and reliance on advisors like Bishop Stephen Gardiner and Cardinal Reginald Pole led her down a path of no return. Each fire lit pushed more English people away from Catholicism, and by the time Mary realized her strategy was failing, it was too late. Her reign, which had begun with promises of reconciliation, became synonymous with repression. Despite these failures, Mary had achievements that are often overlooked. As England's first reigning queen, she proved a woman could rule, setting a precedent for her sister Elizabeth. She implemented economic reforms, such as restructuring the currency, which helped stabilize the kingdom's finances. She also strengthened the English navy, a legacy Elizabeth would later build upon. Her marriage to Philip, though unpopular, was an attempt to position England as a key player in European politics. But these efforts were overshadowed by her mistakes, especially the loss of Calais in 1558. Calais, England's last foothold in France, was captured by the French after a siege that exposed England's military weaknesses. For Mary, already ill and isolated, the loss was a devastating blow. According to legend, she said that when she died, they would find Calais engraved on her heart, a phrase that captures the depth of her desolation. By the end of her life, Mary was a tragic figure. Her health was in ruins, likely due to uterine cancer or a similar illness. Philip, spending most of his time in Spain, barely communicated with her. Her people, exhausted by the persecutions and wars, were increasingly discontent. And, to top it all, Mary knew her half-sister Elizabeth, a Protestant, was the likely heir to the throne. The thought that everything she had fought for, her faith, her legacy, might crumble after her death must have been unbearable. In November 1558, Mary died at St. James's Palace, aged 42. According to tradition, her death coincided with the execution of several Protestants in Canterbury, a cruel reminder of the divisions that defined her reign. Her passing was met with relief by many, and when Elizabeth I took the throne, England embraced Protestantism, erasing much of Mary's legacy. Was Mary a villain, a victim, or something in between? The truth is more complex than a simple verdict. She was a woman of deep convictions, but her inability to adapt to a changed country doomed her to failure. Her frail health, phantom pregnancies, and personal loneliness add a layer of tragedy to her story. The nickname Bloody Mary is unfair but reflects the visceral impact of her decisions. Mary didn't rot in life literally, but metaphorically, her body and spirit were consumed by the weight of a crown that never quite fit. Her story is a reminder that power can be as destructive as it is constructive, and even the noblest intentions can leave a trail of ashes. Mary I teaches us that ruling in the 16th century was a brutal challenge, especially for a woman caught between her faith and her people's expectations. Despite her mistakes, she showed a resilience that deserves recognition. Her life, with all its pain and drama, continues to fascinate because it reminds us how human even a figure shrouded in royal myth can be. So, the next time you hear Bloody Mary, don't just think of a cocktail or a mirror game. Think of Mary Tudor, the queen who tried to change the world and ended up consumed by it. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep exploring stories like Mary's and many more.